Hello, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Rembrandt. I'm head of customer success at Zencity. I had the privilege of working with a number of you and also the members of my team. We're so excited to kick off this webinar with Professor Stephen Goldsmith. Just to give just a short introduction, first of all, if you're not up to date, we already have over 120 partner cities today working with Zencity, and we see it as a community, and we're really excited to have this discussion between our cities, between our partners, and have this opportunity to learn from each other. So this is just the first kickoff of our Zencities community. And to kick that off today, we have Professor Stephen Goldsmith. And Professor Stephen Goldsmith is, let's give you the floor. Go ahead.
Thanks, nice to join everybody. I thought what I might do, we have about an hour and we're hoping for a discussion rather than a lecture. And we have a number of cities that we'll ask Zencity to help us call on. I just want to spend like 7 or 8 minutes on community engagement generally, kind of setting up the stage for sentiment analysis. I've been working, many of you know, I was the mayor of Indianapolis and the deputy mayor of New York City, and run a project on data smart cities at Harvard, and thinking a lot about true community engagement, not kind of nominal community engagement, but actually how do we involve community and citizens in policymaking, planning, crisis response, and the latter. And so just for a couple, before we get to sentiment analysis itself, let's just kind of think a little bit about what this means. So one way to begin, and this is the kind of the agenda for today, we're going to talk about some principles for a second, and then we hope that Cary, Dayton, Evanston, Houston, and Phoenix will join us in some discussions about particularly how they're using sentiment analysis. But as we think about this issue generally, right, so we're looking at how do we encourage citizens / residents to provide data, right? Who organizes the data? Who listens to the data? Who curates the data? And this is really a different form of governance, right? And you know, previously formal governance was very hierarchical, very control and command, occasional community meetings. But this new form of governance says it's collaborative, right? So how do we actually collaborate in order to produce value? How do we generate ideas from citizens along the way? And this can mean several different things. So one way to suggest a filter for this, right, is how do we put citizens at the center of these campaigns? You know, whether it's kind of how we are nudging certain behaviors, if we're thinking about omni-channel for how a citizen chooses, a resident chooses to kind of interact with a city or state or county or the public entity, what are the curated feedback loops, and is 3.1 in and of itself sufficient? So how do you listen to the underserved, right? Because, you know, when I was mayor of Indianapolis, deputy mayor of New York, the folks that had money, the folks that knew how to play the political process, and I don't even mean in any inappropriate way, they could get to the city, they could get to officials. Those who kind of call in, right? So these are just some examples of how one, Philadelphia in one example, in Milwaukee in another, they're reaching out to their communities to listen. But the issues here, right, in Philadelphia and Milwaukee, which are really good examples, is they're very labor intensive. They require individuals to go to a place to organize a conversation, even if they're getting a reaction on the form of an app. This is another example, right, of community planning and ideation, right? So, you know, how do you use 3D imaging? And in South Bend, Mayor Buttigieg, in his park planning efforts, used SMS texting back, but also social media to try to get folks involved. So without slowing everybody down, and I know I'm talking too quickly, all I wanted to say is there is a way, right, that we can reach out to communities. We can do it through 3D imaging on permitting and planning. We can do it in planning how our parks are built, but that requires us to listen more broadly, right? Not just listen to those who are noisiest or most vocal, but how do we listen to them? And the same is true with the 311 apps, where many cities today have apps for purposes of promoting 311. So I just, as we think about the structure of today's conversation, I wanted to just focus on the following, right? how do we use sentiment analysis to raise the voice of those whose voice is not generally heard, right? How do we listen to immigrant communities who may not be comfortable calling the city to complain or ask a question? How do we listen to folks who may speak Spanish and not English, and therefore their ability to kind of communicate or listen or learn is somewhat restricted? How do we use community engagement to advance inclusivity and by reducing the cost of collaboration? And at the same time, how are we going to protect privacy, and how are we going to recognize community generated issues? So just in closing, these are two inescapable impulse here to put two of my book covers up, just in case you're kind of motivated by the subject of kind of how a city should operate. But I think we're ready now for a conversation that says, let's go back here a little bit and say, all right, we want to listen better, right? So Carrie, how do you listen about bike share? Dayton, how do you use community sentiment to both prepare and actuate crisis management? Equity issues in Evanston, augmenting 311 in Houston, and census tracking. So if you, I don't know if it's Hannah or whomever at Zencity, why don't we?
Okay, yes, let's go ahead and start with Carrie. Go ahead.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen a little bit here. So to the extent that you all there's a chat function at the bottom, and we have a lot of people on the phone. So we encourage you to kind of raise your hand in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll call on you, or you can just chat us up and have a record that we'll curate going forward. So let's start with Carrie.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Goldsmith. It's a privilege and an honor to be on the call with you. I've been a student from afar for a very long time, so it's quite an honor to be on the call here today. And Carrie, we've been partnering with Zencity now for over a year and have used it in a variety of areas, many of which you, I think, already have touched on. There's a couple areas that I wanted to highlight that I think build off of what you're talking about. One example is right after we began piloting Zencity is when really the scooters started popping up in our downtown and really throughout the country. And it was an issue that cities were dealing with in a variety of capacities, and our council was interested in getting recommendations from staff on what we should do. And something that's that new, brings both some positive externalities and some negative externalities. So to get really a deeper understanding on how we could better inform the council of the options that were available, we really used Zencity to listen for what were some of the challenges, what was the community saying, both positively and negatively, and use that as a tool. And this is the first time we've done something like this. So it's not so much about the scooters, it's more about how we use the data. There's a couple of other similar examples. We took the information and actually put it right into our staff report or our council memorandums that we take to the city council. And leveraging that data, it helped us make a recommendation that I think was balanced and also was adaptive. So we baked intentionally flexibility into our ordinance so that we could be prepared for whatever kind of that new market had brought to it. Without that information, it would have been much tougher for us as staff to deliver information on what were the consequences, both the pros and the cons of something brand new and kind of unexpected entering our market and entering the public right away. So that was one key example. Another kind of example of how, as staff, we have leveraged this as a tool to not only make recommendations, but to make decisions, is that we had a high-profile fire at a place of worship in the community, and there was immediately concerns that it was arson or perhaps a terrorist incident. And leveraging Zencity, we were able to very quickly realize in less than an hour that it had been picked up by the New York Times and national media, which then allowed us to pivot much more quickly. So someone, for instance, in my role, that's when your day suddenly changes. We were able to get on top of it, get information out that it was actually related to renovation and electrical fire. And most importantly, this is really where it was most important in this instance, we were able to see that the message was being received and it was being delivered effectively. So at that point, we realized we didn't have to do anything else. And and our work had been received well. And that allowed us to communicate to the council that here's exactly what happened, and here's how we have confidence that the information that we've delivered and the stories that are out there are being portrayed accurately or truthfully, and allowed us to kind of move into the next steps of dealing with the issue from that unfortunate incident, both with the organization and the rest of the community. So I think the really key thing there is that it's new, but really what I'm interested in and what we've been really focusing on is, you've mentioned 311, but really using it as a tool to bake it into how we're operating. So whether it's with staff reports that we're sending to council to make recommendations, and as you alluded to, highlighting better what are the consequences of the decisions that we're making, positive and negatively, and then being able to respond to incidents and kind of understand the scale or kind of the true pulse of what is being discussed, whether it's known to us or unknown to us, as you were kind of alluding to from various communities. So we believe it allows us to serve our citizens and as staff, the council, at a higher level by being able to better understand consequences and being able to better understand the value and sometimes the maybe the negative consequences of certain decisions. So I think if we're doing our jobs well, that's exactly what we're delivering to the community, so they can make the best possible choices, eyes wide open.
That's excellent. I have a question or two for you, and then before we move on. By the way, Hannah, can you turn the video back on, just so maybe the presenters one at a time could be videoed as well? Mine won't go back on either. It doesn't make a big difference, but if it's possible.
Sure, we'll take care of that.
So in Cary, you just went through a number of interesting issues, and I think you were using, I first noticed it when you were listening to conversation about scooters. So
yep.
How do you, so there's a couple, there's just sentiment in a community. One is just to listen to the sentiment in a community.
Yep.
And another is to tease up a question, right? So you're suggesting a community, you still may be listening to the community sentiment, but there'll be more of it because you're organizing kind of feedback loops, you're asking questions. So in any of the examples, could you talk to us about how you set that up so you got a higher response rate or more conversation about a subject like scooters or whatever?
Well, I think there's a couple of different items. I mean, so whether it's with something as simple as we just launched a new way of registering for our Parks and Recreation system, so that was just ongoing. So there's kind of a recency effect there. But yeah, so as we launch that system, as we make other changes, you kind of talked about omni-channel, to how we engage. We really are teeing those things up, and we're able to use Zencity to really understand what people are saying about it, maybe in the traditional channels, so on our social media pages, but maybe on other social media pages that quite frankly, we just don't have the staff or the ability or necessarily want to monitor individually or personally on a regular basis. So there's been a number of things. Other things that we've noticed were not so much, and this is kind of the process of implementation, not so much what we were teeing up, but also what civic institutions and key corporations in our community were teeing up. So we kind of calibrated that, so we were able to zero in more on what we were listening, but suddenly we also were seeing things that we maybe weren't aware of that were impacting both our brand and maybe downstream ended up impacting us. So I think really what it is it's kind of understanding who is engaged the most, and then even who is kind of engaging in similar work or parallel work that we weren't really aware of before. So that's starting to change of how we're thinking of our brand, how we're engaging through 311. So I think we just launched 311 in January, so that's still brand new, but I think as that matures, what you're talking about with really being able to tee things up to be able to measure in a certain way, I think is coming. One other kind of tidbit, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole with, but we've worked with Zencity to also look at our internal 311 system and monitor sentiment there, because I really want to be able to see. We use a tool that has a social component, and so I want to see kind of what our internal employee sentiment is on a daily basis and really have a holistic pulse on what is a day in the life in the town of Cary a community of 171,070 square miles. And that's what really Zencity has provided internally and externally.
So anybody who has a question here, feel free to either
So you can share your screen now, Stephen, if you want to.
So let me just skip for a second. Nate Thompson from Houston, are you with us?
Nate is here. Let me add him. Do you have?
Because
Nate is with us.
Nate,
Yeah.
can you turn on your audio? I mean, Carrie, Dan had some interesting comments at the beginning of 311. I was particularly interested, in fact, I wrote about this for governing, when I heard the Houston story of discovering problems about, ambulances that kept getting stuck at train tracks, even though that issue didn't appear on 311. I think that's really an important story. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I haven't seen yet if Nate can connect his audio. So that's, so do you want to go ahead and share?
Well, let's
and
hope.
Also have a question. We have a question from Gina Viviano from Kalamazoo, City of Kalamazoo. And she says, I'd be interested in hearing what Carrie uses for internal sentiment social for employees and how they are measuring eventually. It doesn't need to be asked right now, but we'd want to understand, what you're doing in the city. So maybe, Dan, do you want to answer the question?
Sure, yeah, thanks, and love Kalamazoo. It's been a long time since I've been there, but used to live up that way. So a couple things. The sentiment internally, it's very much in a pilot mode. What we use, our CRM is Salesforce. I had experience with that in Elgin, Illinois, and we really had used a component within Salesforce called Chatter there. And I think maybe more extensively than most even private sector Salesforce customers. And so in Carrie, definitely trying to take that to another gear. And I think one key component of that adoption, so what the easiest way to describe it is think of every 311 request or every address, every asset, every work order of having its own feed. And it's like a radio frequency, just like, 911, is talking over the radio. We're talking through a social channel on each item. So in 311, every request then has this kind of collaboration and social piece. And so what we're trying to get the foundation to look at is then understanding kind of that sentiment internally, so what is the amount of activity in the various feeds, and then what is that that conversation like, as well as the details of maybe, let's say, that 311 request that comes from a citizen, the sentiment kind of based on what the citizen is requesting or asking or sending us, along with then the information, kind of as Stephen was alluding to, other items that we're maybe discovering externally via Zencity to give us a more holistic picture of here's what a day in the life was internally, here's a day in the life of our 311 request, because it's so much more than just seeing here were the record types, here were the types of requests. I want to see the context. And the context comes from that collaboration, and that's what we're really starting to surface. So right now, it's a very, very small group, and even I admit that this early on, I'm not spending a whole lot of time diving too far into it because my focus is more on employee growth and adoption of continuing to grow in Salesforce and 311 again because it's so new. But that's exactly where it's going. So having that infrastructure in place now to start thinking and working that way has just been really important. Hope that answers.
That's a good answer. You also have sentiment in some of the internal documents you have, right? I mean, there's sentiment analysis possible in 311. There's or code enforcement reports or fill in the blank. There's language in those things, and that would be the interesting, next generation. Let's come back to you, Dan. I don't know if Nate got his.
Hey, Nate can. You should be able to speak now, Nate.
Yeah, you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Perfect. No. So I guess you just wanted me to tackle how kind of the issue came about or came to our attention.
Yeah, I think what interested me maybe in the way it fit with Dan, the reason I called on you next, and it's a little out of order, is thinking about how community sentiment analysis can create a more comprehensive picture of concerns in the community that may not necessarily be registered by 311, right? And so I just thought the ambulance was a good example of that, but you may have others you want to talk about as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that one was kind of the one that we've wanted to highlight across the Mayor's Office of Communication and within our office, the Mayor's Office of Innovation. So basically through Zencity, we were able to kind of, like you said, like something that's not captured in 311 through a service request, but was of public concern, that we were able to, one, identify, and then two, create a solution or create the opportunity to provide a solution to the people within the city through a partnership with Microsoft. So now at this point, we're setting up some pilot areas with camera systems that kind of identify these railroad crossings or high traffic railroad crossings, and then using those as opportunities to capture those with video, provide that feedback to the railroad companies. And then also if in the situation where there's noise ordinances in those communities, be able to also identify any kind of decibel level violations in that same intersection.
Mm-hmm. Are there other ways you're thinking about? I mean, so what's interesting, there are a lot of things interesting in your story, but one of the most important ones to me is we've got this interesting concept of public engagement, particularly on 311, which assumes that that collaborating means when a citizen complains that we react. But that's if you think about it, that's kind of a weird definition for two reasons. One, what if we could react before they actually had to complain?
Right.
And what about if they were talking about something important to the city that didn't and they weren't comfortable actually calling to complain, but we could resolve it, right? So what I would think is interesting in your story, and as we think about these new forms of public governance, is the much broader definition of listening than just reacting to who calls in because they're upset with a pothole or something into 311. And I think Houston's done a great job in that regard.
Right. Yeah. No, I would agree with that. And I think to some degree there might be some fatigue of people who get tired of calling in about the same thing, but they might voice that same complaint through some social media platform, and we're able to see that now.
Great. Thanks. We'll come back to you, Nate. Tony from Dayton. So there's this other, as any city that's been through a pretty serious catastrophe knows, there is a lot of important conversation related to a disaster that goes on that is not easily captured, particularly because of either the volume or the disruption of the normal channels. So would you talk just a little bit about Dayton's use in crisis management and sentiment analysis?
I think I heard your question. You wanted to know how we use the platform during our crisis?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So in 2019, the city of Dayton faced a lot of different crises, but the first one that we really used Zencity's platform on was our water outage that happened last February. So we had a large water main break. It was night and it was hard to find. And so people were without water. We lost about 150 million gallons of drinking water. So people were coming home the day before Thanksgiving, the day before Valentine's Day, realizing that they had no water coming out of their faucets. And our crisis communication plan in the past had been that we do not talk to the media other than putting up holding statements until we definitively know what's going on and can provide some reasonable explanation. So as looking at the platform throughout the night, because this went all through the night, we noticed that the public started to say negative things about our response. They felt we weren't being transparent. They wanted answers. And so when we wouldn't provide answers because we didn't have a definitive answer of where this break was, what was causing it, and how soon it would be repaired, the media filled the airwaves. They dubbed it the water crisis. So what we first did was looked at the platform and noticed that we were not putting out enough information. And we began to put out regular statements throughout the evening. But by this time, the damage had really been done. because people felt like they're getting their information from the news, and now they no longer trusted the information that was coming from the city. And I will say that that event almost took us to school, if you will, because we had several other crises last year. We had a KKK rally, we had a mass shooting, we had several other things that happened. But this event, looking at how to use the platform, seeing what the public was saying, and being able to make a change real time is what we began to do. So the next event that we had, we knew right away that every hour or so we need to put information out, even if it was the same information. So people felt that we were the definitive voice of information about what was happening in the city. And we were able to respond to people who were hearing information that was not exactly correct in real time. We noticed several times that people had misinformation. We were able to put out a press release or call a reporter and do an interview, or go on our live stream and say, hey, we know this is being reported. This is not accurate. And I think as we saw as the year went on, unfortunately, we had a lot of events that happened last year. We were able to really start to see the benefit of that from our citizens who are sending us emails and tweets saying, great job, City of Dayton. We understand what's going on. Thanks for addressing that. We even started getting notes from the local media and the national media saying how we had handled all of these crises so well as far as putting out information. And I will tell you, all of that primarily is our use of the Zencity platform. That it was so helpful in our ability to be able to go and see what are people saying about us, what are people thinking about what we put out, and then making that decision right there if we needed to switch the communication tactics that we were using, or if we should stay the course and what we were using was working.
How maybe to you or Dan, anybody really, how are you thinking about the organization of sentiment on a GIS or open data platform, right? Do you visualize it in your open data platform? Do you visualize it with some sort of spatial analytics / GIS? How do you think about those things together?
Oh, I think together. I mean, I think they all work hand in hand. I'm the communications director here at the City of Dayton. So when I'm looking at the platform, it's very helpful to go and see comments, obviously, and then kind of correlate those to what we're getting in on what our Dayton delivers, which is really our 311 platform, and kind of cross-tab both of those to get a real picture of what people are really thinking about what's going on with whatever project we're doing. Unfortunately, like I said, last year we had a lot of crisis, so that's our instance in using the platform, because we went from one thing to the next. After the water event, we had a couple of people involved with corruption here. Then we went to the KKK rally. The next day was the tornado. A month later was the mass shooting. So we only specifically have used this platform to deal with crises so far.
Got it. Okay, that's good. Okay,
we have an interesting question from an anonymous attendee. How do you feel about using sentiment data in engaging your communities on potential building projects? Do you feel it is better to engage physically in public or in a digital forum?
Maybe others heard that question, because you repeated the middle sentence that I didn't hear.
So I'll repeat the question, and I'll also encourage if anyone wants to raise their hand and answer the question or jump in the conversation. I think this is a fascinating question. So the question is, again, how do you feel about using sentiment data, engaging your communities on potential building projects? Do you feel it is better to engage physically in public or in a digital forum?
Anybody have
so if you raise your hand, we'll unmute you, and we'd love to hear.
So let me know when somebody raises their hand, but in the meantime, let me just talk. So isn't the answer to that question yes? In the following sense, right? Community meetings are inherently problematic, right? The folks who show up may not be representative. They may all have vested interests or a particular stakeholder. There's often people performing, in front of others, but they're legitimate interested citizens and residents, but, it is a slice. So I put up here in response, I think you all can see my screen, this Philadelphia redevelopment progress, which is basically, if you're doing a zoning of a building, then you can use in real time 3D. You can move the building, you can change the massing, you can change the height in order to check on shadows, and then you can ask for responses. So it would seem right that a wonderful way to think about this would be all of the above, right? Because there's a large number of folks who may be discussing this building, if you will, in Philadelphia, but they're not coming to the meetings, right? They don't think it makes much difference. They come to the meetings. They don't have time off from work or childcare. They don't like speaking in front of a lot of people, but they have an opinion. So does anybody have their hand up there, Hannah, that you might call on? But my view was that these things complement each other nicely.
Yeah, I mean, currently we don't have someone with their hand up. If you want to chat us or have your hand up, then let us know. I can also share with you from, the different experiences with our cities that we've also seen that it's important to combine both and to take both in consideration. Also, I think we have, Shanika has the ability to speak if you want to join in.
This is Dan from Cary. I was just going to say, I think it really comes down to just what was kind of mentioned there. I think the answer is it truly depends. I totally agree that the traditional kind of community meeting, isn't the end all be all. And it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish and the nature of the development. But I really think that this type of deeper listening provides a better collection of intelligences that leads to the best outcome that's right for that community. So I think it really comes down to making sure that you understand what the outcome is that you're trying to accomplish for the community. Again, understanding consequences, so that I think the reality is it needs to be a combination of different tools and tactics is the best approach. So.
In the several years ago, not when I was mayor, after Indianapolis hosted a Super Bowl, and cities had a fair amount of experience in hosting large events, and they had a group of individuals during the Super Bowl festivities, the couple days before, who were looking at social media sentiment and trying to preemptively solve problems, like a conversation about insufficient parking in this particular area, or folks who were saying they were concerned about what felt like unsafe spaces under bridge passes, right? Or people trying to ask questions about talking to each other about, how do I find this location or that location? Their ability to identify those social conversations and then preemptively help solve them showed a responsiveness on the part of the city that was pretty amazing, just as an example.
Luke asked to be unmuted. He's now unmuted.
Luke, good.
And also if, wait, let me see. Okay, yeah, Luke, you should be able to speak now. Luke is unmuted.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Technology is amazing. I just wanted to mention that we did use Zencity for several things in the past couple months. We did have, without getting into too much details, a local reparations effort here at Evanston. And they garner a lot of attention both locally and regionally and even nationally. And it was interesting to see, especially for the sentiment analysis. It was I think 7 times.
Hey, Luke.
Hey,
Luke.
Yes.
It feels like your phone and your computer is both on. Is it?
Let me.
I'm hearing each word twice.
Okay, I think we fixed it now, so you can go ahead.
Okay, is that better?
I think so.
We found that the sentiment analysis was 7 times better in Evanston than it was regionally or nationally. So it might have been more controversial in other circles, but locally in Evanston, we found it to be generally well received.
Can you give us some more detail?
Yeah, I'm also getting the bounce back or the feedback. Shanika from our team, I don't know if she's able to speak further too.
Well, yes, unfortunately, we're not able to, I mean, Shanika is unmuted, but I think we're not able to hear her. Luke, now you're unmuted. If you want to try.
There was one other thing I wanted to mention that I found Zencity very useful for is sometimes there have been issues that are not related to the city directly, but people are very passionate about or they're voicing negative sentiment about. So I think it's very helpful. Like for one quick example is we had a local legislator about a week ago propose some controversial legislation in Springfield, and a lot of folks were talking about it. But even though it didn't directly deal with our operations, it's good for us to know what the community is thinking about and talking about.
Luke, you all do a lot of work on equity. How do you think about specifically using community engagement, sentiment analysis to listen to communities who normally don't have a voice, right? Who don't to those conversations?
One of the most important things for us is, we have the same challenges as other communities where we have a small group of folks that come to each council meeting and tend to be of the same opinion. We're trying to use different topics and issues. There actually is a wide variety of sentiment and opinions that happen
on different ends of the spectrum.
You know, we lost a few sentences. We heard different end of the spectrum. Could you do the 3 sentences before that one more time for us?
Sure. Yeah. Just to recap, we found that we tend to have the same challenges as other communities where a small vocal group comes to every meeting. They tend to be of the same opinion, but we know there's 75,000 other people in the community that have a wide variety of opinions: positive, negative, neutral, etc. And so we've been able to leverage Zencity to analyze some of these issues and topics as they come up. Because if you just go by the 10 or 20 or 30 people that come to our meetings that all have similar opinions, you come to find out that actually if you truly survey the rest of the community, people who may not be able to come to the meetings for various reasons, due to work commitments, family commitments, and other things, you get this much broader view of what the community is actually feeling on a particular topic.
Great. Anybody else have any, we just randomly picked on some cities. There's obviously a lot of cities who are doing other things. Anybody want to volunteer? If not, we'll probably try to collect your stories by email. I'm interested in writing about some of them, and Zencity's interested in collecting them. Anybody else have any?
We had a question about coronavirus from Tiffany from Pasadena. Wanted to know if anyone else is gathering, collecting information regarding this. So if anyone wants to share about this, we'd love to hear.
So if anyone is, let us know, even if you're reluctant to speak in front of 50 other people. We'd love to know. The other thing, Hannah or anybody else on the phone, so I know that you all use Zencity have looked at sentiment analysis and census. I manage a program for chiefs of staff of large cities at Harvard, and about intentionally misleading social media that would get in the way of answering census questions, right? So could there be could there be rumors that would be inhibiting to particularly immigrant communities to answer census questions? And so listening to the conversations about census, the sentiment about census, would allow a city to preemptively intervene. Hannah, do you have any examples of that, or does anybody on the webinar have any examples of that?
So I'll just say, first of all, on regarding the census, that we are working on this with the city of Phoenix, and the issue of misinformation is a really core issue with our partner cities, and being able to understand where the misinformation is coming from, not only geographically, but on what channels, on what media channels, like where do people discuss this misinformation, in order to, in a precise way and in a way that gets to the residents themselves, be able to address it directly. I also want to say that we got here in the chat from Taylor Wolf about the previous issue about coronavirus, that they're not following it yet, but they are going to set up a project today. It seems to be bubbling up. And I think that's a great way to start following that issue. Is we do have a number of our cities, our partners setting up projects in the platform to easily track that issue. And I think if we're going to see common themes across different cities, we'd love to share that within the community. What are common things that are coming up in various cities? What are residents concerned about, and how can the city, as an important public health issue, be communicative about that?
It's great. Anything else?
Right now, I don't see any additional question or comment or anyone. Let's see if anyone is raising their hand. Nope, not currently.
So let's circulate not just the PowerPoint, but maybe an additional slide or some information on each of the subjects from the presenters. Plus, you're going to think about coronavirus as well, and we'll build some people on the call. And any of you want to reach me directly, you can find me on the Harvard Kennedy School website. If you're particularly proud of something you've done and you think we should feature it in Governing Magazine or at Harvard, please email me at, you can find the address, but it's Stephen with a PH _ Goldsmith at harvard.edu. I'd love to hear it from you. There's really interesting things going on. Hannah, you want the last word?
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Professor Goldsmith. That was really fascinating, and I'm really happy that we also had so many participants and started this initial conversation, and it gave us a lot of ideas of what we want to do moving forward. I also want to take this opportunity to introduce you to Daniel, who's our new VP of Local Government Services.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Professor Goldsmith, for leading such a fascinating discussion. And thank you to our partner cities, really, for taking time to join this call. We are really incredibly proud at Zencity of the collective knowledge sharing that we're facilitating. So thank you for taking part in that. In addition to being really excited to meet you, I wanted to share that our team will be attending a number of conferences in the coming months, and we are looking forward to seeing all of you there. We will be attending the Southeast Regional ICMA Conference in Durham, in which we're speaking with our partner City of Cary here on the call. We'll be attending the Ohio City and County Management Association in Columbus as well. We're going to be in New Orleans with Professor Goldsmith next week, attending the Cities Today conference. We're also going to be in the West Coast Regional ICMA Conference in Vancouver, speaking with our partner cities there as well. In Mountain Plains Regional ICMA Conference in Irving, Texas, and in Smart Cities Connect Spring Conference in Denver, Colorado. We have speaking opportunities to showcase your success as well, and we're always happy to collaborate on that. Feel free to reach out to our team if you're interested in one of those. We'll engage with you proactively as well. Thank you again, Professor Goldsmith. It was a fascinating discussion, and thank you everyone for attending.
Participate. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, everyone.